Tonight, I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. After the fall of the Assad regime, we asked the question, is there now a risk that jihadis, or even those that committed atrocities under Assad, could find a way into the United Kingdom? How do we deal with it? The national insurance rise has left the hospices around this country really very, very worried about their future. Is there an argument that hospices should be exempted from a national insurance rise? And Storm Darragh destroys Britain's biggest solar farm. Do we need a rethink about this particular form of renewable energy? But before all of that, let's get the news with Sophia Wensler.
Nigel, thank you. Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. Your top story from the GB newsroom this hour. The UK and Germany have reached a landmark deal to tackle migrant smuggling. Germany has agreed to tighten laws, making it easier to prosecute smugglers behind small boat crossings to the UK. The deal also focuses on intelligence sharing and removing smuggling content from social media to disrupt criminal networks. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, speaking at a meeting with European leaders this morning, said the agreement will strengthen border security and save lives.
Gangs have been getting away with it for far too long. That's why today's meeting is so important. In recent weeks, we have already seen the important impact of a collaboration across our countries, the significant arrest of a major suspect involved in smuggling engines and boats, involving collaboration between the Netherlands, Belgium and the UK, the series of arrests that have taken place across Germany with the French-led operations in the last week.
Now, Independent MP Iqbal Mohammed has spoken out against a proposed ban on first cousin marriages in the UK, calling the move unnecessary and unenforceable. Speaking in the Commons, Mr Mohammed acknowledged the health risks, but stressed the need for a cultural shift, not legislation, to address the issue. He did condemn forced marriages and virginity testing, highlighting the need to protect women's rights. However, the MP for Dewsbury and Batley argues that banning first cousin marriages would not solve the problem. In other news, billionaire Nick Candy has pledged a 7-figure donation to Reform UK after announcing he'll become the party's new treasurer in the new year. The property tycoon, who resigned from the Conservative Party over what he called too many broken promises, will now help raise funds ahead of May's local elections. And the fathers of 2 murdered policewomen have hailed the new Elizabeth emblem as a fitting tribute to their daughters and others who have died in the line of duty. Bryn Hughes and Paul Bone both received the emblem from the King during the first presentation of the awards following the deaths of their daughters, PC's Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone, who were murdered after answering a 999 call. King Charles spent an hour with the families of 38 public servants, chatting about the loved ones they lost and handing over the nation's gratitude in the form of the emblem. Speaking to GB News today, PC Fiona Bone's father, Paul Bone, spoke about what the award means.
I think she'd be highly pleased to, if she was here today, to receive an award. But she wasn't really into awards. She liked a coronation medal, so I should imagine she would have been over the moon with this award.
Excellent.
Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, the whole world has been stunned by the speed with which the Assad regime has fallen in Syria. All over, start to finish, in less than 3 weeks. Quite extraordinary. Assad, who'd started off, I think for many, with great hope. Somebody who trained in London, married a woman in London. We thought maybe Western influences would come to Syria, things would change. Actually, arguably, it turned into a complete nightmare. And then we had the rebel forces, and it was always complicated to know who are they? Were they Al-Qaeda? Were they ISIS? What are the current group of people? I don't know. There's been great rejoicing that Assad has gone, and it leaves a very, very big open question. Yesterday, we saw Germany, Austria, Sweden, and then slightly France, then slightly belatedly the United Kingdom say, right, we're halting all asylum applications. And I guess there are two reasons for that. One is you could say, well, now that Assad has gone, it's a perfectly safe country, so why should anybody want to claim asylum here? But the second and perhaps more sinister one is, does it mean that there'll be people now leaving Syria, maybe those who committed murderous acts in the name of Assad? Does it mean those who fought for ISIS that have maybe been freed from some of these prisons that might start to come in our direction? Maybe one very good example through which we can debate this is Shamima Begum. Should she now be allowed to return? Will she possibly be allowed to return? And remember, she's lost every court case in this country. Tell me what you think in the light of the fall of that regime. Should she be allowed to come to the UK? Farage at GBNews.com. And it's complicated. No one quite knows how things will settle down in Syria. But I'm joined in the studio, not for the first time, by Tasneem Akunje, Shamima Begum's family lawyers. You're not her lawyer, you're the family's lawyer. Now, you've made these arguments over years. You've lost court case after court case. And the answer is, we've said her citizenship has gone, she can't return to the country, but you think that things may have changed?
Well, the situation is that her case is now going to go to the European courts, but the court cases that have been lost have been about the decision that was originally made by a politician, Sajid Javid, around an individual status. Now, we haven't had a jury trial with Shamima Begum. No evidence has been put of any wrongdoing to her in UK law. But what the Supreme Court had actually decided was that Parliament had given themselves such power that they felt that they couldn't question that. And that itself is an erosion of the idea of the separation of powers that is the fundamental basis of our society, which is that we don't have politicians making decisions about individuals. We allow that for the courts. And Lord Anderson at the time, criticising the whole rubric around stripping, suggested that a better approach would have been for a Home Secretary to be able to refer to a judge a request to have somebody's citizenship stripped, and then that checked in light of the law.
Why does the fall of the Assad regime make you think it's more likely her case might get reconsidered?
Well, I think the issue there is what is the impact that's going to happen on her and all the other people who are in those sort of camps. And we don't know the answer to that at the moment. The camps are actually being run by the Kurdish forces who were previously against Assad, but then were co-opted into his army. And they're currently being bombarded by, or aerial assaulted by the Turks at the moment. So there is a great degree of fluidity in the situation. However, this was not completely unforeseeable. These arguments were made in the courts to say that those camps were not likely to be permanent and war was likely to overtake the situation there. Now we're going to look at, 100,000 people who may bleed out of those camps into the hinterland, or a lot of people being killed, and women and children.
And, her case aside, what worries me, we can go all the way back to 2015, when the boats first started crossing the Mediterranean, when ISIS very, very boldly, publicly said they would send their operatives into Europe, and of course that means ultimately, in some cases, onto us. Is the Home Secretary not right, the Foreign Secretary not right, to say that right now we should freeze all asylum applications?
No, I agree with that.
You do agree with that?
Because the situation in Syria is so potentially toxic that we do not know who's, and we will not know who's able to come over through a relatively porous scheme. But Shamima Begum's is not the case as the...
it's a different case.
Yeah, it's a different case indeed.
Fine. I'm joined by Charlie Downs, political strategist and former content lead at the Centre for Migration Control, and, interestingly, Joe Phillips, former Paddy Ashdown press secretary, but more significantly, somebody that knows Syria, lived in Syria, Love to share some of your experiences of that country and what's been happening there.
Well, I am, like so many people, Nigel, absolutely delighted to see the fall of Assad. But like so many people, I was completely and utterly conned by him. I was a member of the British Syrian Society, and we honestly believed that when he became president, that he was a reformer. You know, as you said in your introduction, he trained here as an ophthalmologist. He was married to a woman who'd grown up and been brought up in this country, albeit with, you know, Syrian heritage. And we really honestly believed that he was going to change things. And he had all the opportunities. You know, we were running events and conferences to open investment, to promote the tourism and the culture and the history of the country. And then the entire the British members of the British Syrian Society, we resigned en masse when it was quite clear what was happening and the fact that, you know, there were terrible lies and things going on. But it is, I mean, as anybody who's been fortunate enough to go there knows, it is the most wonderful country. I mean, I was involved with an exhibition with the V&A. First time it had been taken stuff back to Syria. And it was astonishing. It is a beautiful country. It's rich in culture, heritage, art. And it was the country where you could actually walk around and it felt very cohesive. You could see women in full burqas walking along the road with somebody...
And mixed religion. People sitting in Damascus of all different religions.
Absolutely, you know, Greek Orthodox
Just a decade ago.
Yes, absolutely.
What do you make of the rebel forces? Is it? I mean, can we interpret who they really are?
I think we can probably say we need to keep a very close eye on the deeds that will speak more than the words. You know, we know that HTS is apparently no longer Al-Qaeda.
Do we believe that?
I think it's not impossible to believe, but I think we need to wait and see. I mean, I think, you know, as you said, it is so complicated and there are so many factions. But the one thing I would say is that most of the Syrians I know can't wait to go back to their home.
Well, this is the funny thing, isn't it? Because we're talking about whether,
home.
you know, Shamima can come back and whether we might potentially make mistakes and open the doors to terrorists. But there is an argument that if there is some settled form of government, a lot of people, I mean, over 7 million Syrians displaced, half of them in Turkey. Yeah. There is an argument they might go back. Charlie, what do you make of the situation there?
Well, between 2014 and 2024, 20,000 Syrians were resettled in the UK as part of various different government schemes. Yeah. And if those people aren't then sent back to Syria, what we have is not an asylum system. What we have is a system whereby people from poorer parts of the world are able to migrate to richer parts of the world. That's really all it is. And if Syria does not receive these people back, for one thing, I think they're going to have a harder time rebuilding. And for another, it will, you know, again, it will show our system to be fundamentally broken.
Well, you don't know what those 20,000 people do. Well, are any of them working?
Do you mean
as
what skill sets they've
got? Yes, exactly. I mean, are some of them employed as doctors?
But it seems like Syria needs those people.
What is for certain
of course it does.
is that for Syria to rebuild, it is going to need some of the 7 million that have fled.
Yeah,
and that is absolutely right.
And if we assume, as we're told so often, that all of these people are doctors, engineers, lawyers, etc., then that's even more reason for them to return.
No, I get the point. And I mean, look, I don't know which way this is going to go. None of us know which way this is going to go.
The only thing I would say, Nigel, is that, you know, after the civil war in Lebanon, it did manage to create a fragile sort of peace and civic government and civil society, bringing in just as much a complicated mixture of religions and ethnic groups. And the one thing that I think is quite encouraging about what's happening, as far as I can tell, is that HTS have been talking to civil society groups and they have made it clear that they want institutions to carry on. You know, they're not going in and just wrecking.
Well, I hope that's right.
Let's hope.
And what do you make of the Shamima Begum case?
Well, I think what Tasneem was saying is very interesting. It is that difference between, you know, the judiciary and politics. And, of course, it is a very politically emotional and toxic case that creates a very, very strong feeling, not least of all on, you know, GBNews and other outlets. But I do think there is perhaps an argument for a trial. And I think, given that, you know, if she is being held in a detention camp which may just disintegrate, then what? Wouldn't it be better to let her come back here and have a fair trial?
Charlie, just one moment. I'll let you have the final word on this, I promise. Charlie, should Shamima Begum, should we reconsider the case?
I struggle with that, to be honest, knowing what we know about Shamima Begum, and this is not a story that I've read about recently, but, you know, I remember this was when I was kind of growing up that this story was really exploding, and I remember thinking at the time, well, you know, this is a girl who, sure, she was born in Britain, if I recall correctly, but she left to go to Syria to fight for ISIS, or not fight for ISIS, rather, but to be involved in
ISIS bride, basically.
in some capacity. Is that really the kind of person that we want in our
The argument
country?
against that would be that she was 15 when she went.
Well, maybe, but again, I mean, you know, are we to believe that she's completely reformed and expunged these ideas from her head?
And Tasneem, that's the hard bit, isn't it? That first interview she gave, she was pretty unrepentant about her views.
I think it was Anthony Lloyd who interviewed her,
Yeah.
and he published that story pretty much without editorial at all. So we got it all very sort of square. And he spent many months afterwards trying to convince Parliament to actually have her repatriated, because in his view, the one person who can commentate on her views and the context of it, he spent his time and energy to try and convince Parliament to bring her back. But the idea that we expect our Syrians who are now, you know, many of them with indefinite leave to remain in the UK, some of them will be citizens, to go back to their home country because that's what the patriotic thing to do is, despite whatever they may be up to here, without even asking that question, it's a little bit hypocritical to then say we're not going to have one of our own back who was a child when she was...
So that's the trade?
Yeah.
No, and that's a fairly reasonable point. Well, there's one Syrian I want to leave the country, and he's called Madapasa. And, of course, he'd gone to Sweden, where he'd been arrested for knife crime. He made his way to the UK on a small boat. He's repeatedly publicly threatened to kill me. He's currently in custody. I think he really ought to return to Syria. Thank you, everybody. Very complex, very difficult debate. There are no absolute answers. We're going to watch what happens in Syria with interest. We're also going to hope and pray that the new regime is markedly better than the last one. In a moment, we're going to hear a plea from a hospice, and they say that they're in Colchester, and they say that the national insurance rise is going to dramatically affect the service they can provide. And when you think we've just had a vote in Parliament for assisted dying, surely palliative care should matter even more.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And the latest series of Big Brother has just wrapped up. And as always, the housemates managed to cause a stir.
Yeah, that's an understatement. After 5 weeks of drama and twists and turns, 6 housemates were left to battle it out for a £90,000 prize.
Well, our next guest was there to the bitter end, coming third in this year's competition.
6 weeks you were in there.
Oh, I tell you what, it was a long time.
What goes through your mind? Is it, do you start to go a bit sort of, what do they call it, cabin fever?
Yeah.
Do you go a bit nutty?
Like, at times, not that I've ever been in prison, but I kind of likened it to being in jail, particularly when we were having to eat the porridge with water, no sugar, or, you know, that was difficult. And the feeling that you just can't leave. I mean, you can, but... You know, it was, yeah.
You can, but you won't get your hands on that prize money.
No, exactly.
You made it to the end.
Yeah.
And it's quite a big house, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you feel as though you can get away from housemates if they're annoying you a bit, or does it feel like your hot house with people you don't like very much?
If you're sort of, you know, if you're not comfortable with a certain conversation or something like that, you can always take yourself and move away. But can you have time to yourself? No. Not really. I mean, even you might think, do you know what, I'll just go and lock myself in the toilet for a few minutes. There's a camera and there's a mic in there, so you can't escape that. And then you're obviously wearing a mic, so there is that little feeling of, you know, I could just do with having 5 minutes to myself, but you can't really get it.
You've met up with one side of the house, but not the other side yet. But is that still on the cards, do you think?
I hope so, yeah, because I liked every single person in that house, despite a few whispers on the internet, you know, like, do you not like this? I liked everybody in the house, never had a bad word with anybody, so...
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
I asked you, should Shamima Begum be allowed to return to the United Kingdom? Graham says, now that Assad is gone and the vacuum likely filled by ISIS Al-Qaeda sympathisers, it would surely become Shamima Begum's spiritual home, with more in common with the new Syrians than anywhere else here in the UK. Look, we just don't know. We don't know what this new regime is going to be like, but like you, I have my suspicions. And two, maybe she's repented. Susan says, this woman should not be permitted entry back into the UK. She was a danger to the country then and possibly now, even more so, to seek revenge against the UK. Well, a fairly unforgiving GB News audience, and I guess that's probably how the country as a whole does feel on that one. Now, the national insurance rise is, we are told, crippling hospices. And we've had this huge debate in the last few weeks about assisted dying. And many, many people in the House of Commons, and I sat there and listened, said that palliative care is not, in many cases in Britain, where it needs to be. Well, surely, if our hospices are going to be hit by these rises, it could make the situation even worse. I'm joined live down the line by Mark Jarmanhow, Chief Executive of St Helena Hospice in Colchester. And you're a pretty big hospice, aren't you?
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. Yeah, we're one of the largest in the east of England, supporting nearly 4,500 patients and families every single year.
So just tell us, what does the national insurance rise, what does it really mean for the finances of your hospice?
Well, the changes announced in the October budget, the combination of bringing down the threshold at which employers' national insurance takes effect and increasing the rate, as well as the significantly above inflation increase in the national minimum wage, is going to cost St Helena £385,000 next year. That's equivalent to us having to raise more than £1,000 extra every single day, and it already costs us £54,000 a day to provide all of the care and support that we do in people's homes, in the hospice, and through our 24/7 support line.
And so tell us, what is your funding model? Explain to everybody, how do you, as a major hospice, how do you get your money?
Well, I think your viewers will be somewhat surprised to know that we only get a 20% contribution from the National Health Service. So we're having to generate from the goodwill of our local community. We serve the whole of North Essex, so that Colchester, Harwich, Clacton, and we're having to raise 80% of our income that we need every year. We're raising more from our charity shops than we're getting in our grant income from the NHS. We're having to run cleaning businesses, care agencies, as well as all of our traditional fundraising and very generous gifts in wills. So it's not for lack of innovation, it's not for lack of effort. In fact, we're working harder year on year. But the sad truth is this national insurance rise is going to mean that we need to either find new ways of raising funds in a really competitive environment, or we're going to have to cut services. And that leaves us in a really invidious position when we're already propping up the National Health Service.
And what is the state of palliative care in this country? There were many, many voices in the House of Commons that said that the hospices need not less support through these hikes, but actually need more support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we need to remember we've got some of the best palliative care in the world in the UK, and as a specialty, and the modern hospice movement as well. We're both founded within the UK, so we've got much to be proud of in this country. The heritage that we've got. But the sad truth is that it's been eroded in recent years. A combination of significant increases in demand post-COVID, a big increase in costs of running care services, both in terms of pay pay, utilities and cost of living. And also that's hitting us at a time when we're getting real terms cuts in public sector funding. So it's putting us in a really, really difficult position. And as I say, I think we know the demand is there across the country as a whole. It's about 1 in 4 people that would benefit from palliative care or hospice care is not getting that at the moment. We're doing slightly better than that in Colchester and North Essex at the moment. But the sad thing is, if there isn't a reversal of the decision around the national insurance, that we will go backwards and we will start to see more inequity and more gaps opening up.
Mark Jarman-Howe, thank you for coming on and explaining that so clearly. I don't know, Joe Phillips. There has to be surely an argument that Rachel Reeves needs to make 1 or 2 exemptions. And I thought, really, what was said there was very powerful.
Well, yes. I mean, the fact that they only get 20% of their income.
Did you know that?
No, I knew it. They didn't get that 100%, but I didn't realise it was so low.
I bet you very few viewers knew that.
And that is staggering. And that tells you a lot about the British people and about how they will support and help.
Absolutely.
And, and the fact that, as Mark said, they're doing all these innovative things. I thought the other interesting point that he made is that they're working and providing care and support in people's homes. It's not just in the hospice buildings. Now, you can't equate that care with somebody who is at the end of life, with the hard-pressed carers who are going out with a very limited time, 15 minutes, and then they've got to drive somewhere else. So I think it is, Rachel Reeves has got to listen to this. And there are times when, as any grown-up politician knows, sometimes you say, OK, I didn't think this through. I didn't realise this was going to happen. This has got to change.
Charlie, it was quite powerful testimony, wasn't it?
It was. And there's one detail of this story that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, which I think shows our labyrinthine tax system for the absurdity that it is, which is that this is going to cost, as it says on the screen, hospices about £5 million a year. But Wes Streeting has committed to maintaining the child hospice grant, which gives child hospices £25 million a year. So there's this ridiculous situation where, where they're losing money. They're losing money because of one tax, they're gaining money because of this grant, and it's just going around the houses, and it's just so inefficient.
Do you think Rachel Reeves is a woman that might say, and Joe suggested, look, it's not the end of the world to say we didn't quite think this through. I don't think she's really in the mood for that, do you?
Well, her message discipline seems pretty lacking because, just, when was it, last week we had her coming out and saying there's going to be no more tax rises. Keir Starmer then the next day comes out and says, actually, I can't rule that out. It seems like there is a lack of communication between this government, which is very concerning.
They're not listening at all, Joe, are they?
No, they don't seem to be listening. And, it is quite astonishing that, within 5 months they've managed to unite farmers, pensioners, business, hospices and pretty much everybody else in thinking, well, that was a pretty rubbish budget. And what they don't seem to have done is use the time, because it was an extraordinary length of time between the election and budget. It was nearly 4 months.
It was.
Hugely long time. They didn't seem to use that time to listen to people. And, you don't have to be a rocket scientist for somebody to say, hang on a minute, this is going to have a terrible impact on the hospice sector. All you've got to do is then go and check it. And if you go, no, you're crying crocodile tears, that's fine. But clearly they're not. And I do think, we get caught in, and you know this, Nigel, you are a politician, I've worked with politicians, you know perfectly well, it is seen as a weakness to go back.
To admit you're wrong.
Particularly when you're the Chancellor and you're supposed to be the Iron Chancellor and all that. But sometimes you just have to go, OK, I hear you. OK.
Well, we'll see. I very much doubt that she will. And it's funny because we all saw the budget as an attack on the private sector, and yet hospices and many GP practices equally are going to be hit by this. I've spoken to several GP practices that already have laid staff off, and you wouldn't have thought they were in the private sector, would you? In a moment, we'll have a look at whether Rachel Reeves is right to look for an EU reset. And we'll discuss, why does an MP support first cousin marriages? Shouldn't we move beyond that?
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. The fog thickening up in places overnight, and slow to clear across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in particular tomorrow. Elsewhere, much of England and Wales is dry and cloudy. High pressure is keeping things that way. Not many big changes with the weather, but the wind's still coming in from the northeast, still feeding in a few showers across southeast England overnight. Elsewhere, as I said, most places dry, bit of drizzly rain heading into Shetland, but it's the fog thickening up across southwest Scotland and the west of Northern Ireland that could cause some problems. Freezing fog as temperatures fall well below freezing. We could see negative double digits through some sheltered glens across Scotland. That fog, particularly in and around Glasgow and across the west of Northern Ireland, may stick around for all of tomorrow. Certainly a dull, damp and drizzly start across Shetland, but actually some of the highest temperatures here to begin the day. We could be -9, -10 through some of the sheltered glens across Scotland. A cold start for Northern Ireland. That fog, particularly in the west, again, stubborn and slow to clear. And this cloud is pretty stubborn across England and Wales. Maybe some breaks in the cloud across northwest Wales, the far northwest of England. So chance of a bit of sunshine here and there, but mostly just staying cloudy, but largely dry. It's in the far south where we'll continue just to see a few showers and still a fairly brisk and chilly wind. Elsewhere, the wind's pretty light, generally a bit lighter than today. Temperatures still touch below average, 6 or 7 Celsius for most. Sunnier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but temperatures here only 4 or 5 at best. And again, where that fog sticks, we're not going to get above freezing. Some of that fog thickening up again Wednesday night into Thursday morning. So again, that could be slow to clear on Thursday. Thicker cloud across these eastern and central parts of England on Thursday. Some drizzly rain is likely here, so quite dank. And again, not feeling very warm with temperatures, for the most part, single digits.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here is a statistic I want you to remember. In 2008, the size of the American economy was exactly the same size as the Eurozone economy. Here we are 15 years on. The American economy is now double the size of the Eurozone economy. And yet, this government is looking for an EU reset, looking to get closer to the European Union. And the EU are making it clear that to do this, we're going to need to make concessions on fishing and on youth mobility. And whilst I think we should have as good a relations as we possibly can with our European neighbours, I wonder whether doing these things says to America, we don't really care about you. Joe, obviously I know you were against Brexit, but we are 8 years on. The point I made about the relative economics of America and Europe, I think is quite powerful.
It is a powerful point, but I think the other point is that Brexit has been a complete cock-up, and there are very few people, I think, who can point to any benefits. And on Thursday this week, there are new rules that are going to come in, and we were just talking about hospices and national insurance, new rules that are going to affect the small businesses because they've got to have an agent based in an EU country if they want to sell within.
And for Northern Ireland, this is a real problem.
Northern Ireland. So,
it's not so much Brexit that's the problem, but the way that we've done it.
Well, yes, you can argue that. I mean, I would personally say we shouldn't have done Brexit in the first place. But we won't go down.
The Ramonas.
No. we won't go down that path again. We can play our old favourites. But I do think, the thing about mobility, the thing about the small businesses are hugely impacted, and means many of them will just go out of business, because if you're selling something for 25 quid, but you've got to import...
95% of small businesses do no business with Europe at all.
Well, quite a lot do, apparently.
But
the mobility thing, I don't understand why Keir Starmer is so against this, because it is a limited time that allows students to move around and, experience life in different countries.
And then they settle here.
Well, not always.
In much larger numbers than we settle there.
Always.
We've seen this again and again and again.
Well, I don't...
And we can't go on with net migration approaching 1 million people a year.
Let's try and move away from migration, Nigel, just
but
for
you
once.
can't. How can you?
Because you need to think of the bigger picture. We've just been talking about Syria. We know that the Middle East is in crisis. That is going to have a much greater impact on our lives in Europe than it is on America. It will have an impact on America, no doubt, whether Trump wants it or not, because of the global implications. But on our lives, whether that's about immigration or whether it's about defence and security, we need to have a better relationship with Europe. And we can tread the tightrope, if you like, between trade with Europe and America. We don't have to choose either or.
That's the important point, actually, that Brexit gives us the freedom to do that, because we're now able to make our own negotiations with America, which we would not be as an EU member.
Well, there we go. So
there we go. Swings and roundabouts.
So we can make our own arrangements for the EU.
We're actually in a very flexible, nimble position. So do we need to get back closer to the European Union, or will that be seen by millions of Labour voters as a bit of a sellout?
Well, this is the key. It's about who, isn't it? Because if we had, for instance, a reform-led government partnering with an EU where the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany are in government, and we are united in, for example, ending this tide of mass migration to Europe in a united front, I think that's desirable.
Like
but with that being said...
1930s all over again.
Well, I don't think there are direct parallels with the 1930s,
no,
to be fair. I mean, I know some people try and say that, but...
But I can't help but think that in this... in this paradigm where we are led by a Keir Starmer-headed Labour government, where we are dealing with the bureaucrats in Brussels, I can't help but think that the UK will be the junior partner in that arrangement. And I think that any deal, any so-called reset, will be essentially an optics exercise. I don't think...
We'll have to give too much away. Let's go back on to these moral issues, which have been big over the course of the last month. So Conservative Member of Parliament Richard Holden is putting forward a proposal calling for a ban on first-cousin marriages, and the reasons for that are fairly obvious. It's health, it's birth defects. And yet, Iqbal Mohammed, an independent MP for Dewsbury and Batley, had this to say in the House of Commons.
We try to step into the shoes of those who perhaps are not from the same culture as ours, to better understand why the practice continues to be so widespread. The reason the practice is so common is that ordinary people see family intermarriage overall as something that is very positive, something that helps build family bonds and helps put families on a more secure financial foothold.
Isn't the problem, Joe, that you get first-cousin marriages and then you get more first-cousin marriages and you begin to see in some of the communities that Iqbal Mohammed is talking about much higher rates of birth defects?
Well, I'm sure, Nigel, that I am not alone in thinking that actually it was illegal. And I was quite surprised to hear it today. It is only sibling marriages.
Yeah.
A very interesting study over 10 years carried out in Bradford, which has seen a huge decrease in the number of first-cousin marriages. And they have looked at it from the point of view of education and health, because, as you rightly say, it's a small number, but they are significant.
It can be very serious too.
Defects. And what happens is, and one of the things that didn't come out in that clip is we do need to look at arranged marriages. We do need to look at where somebody is taken away and married off to their first cousin and then, what have you.
Yeah.
We do need to look at education. And the evidence from this Bradford survey and study over very many years does show that the better education that the women in particular have and the more independence they have, and they will move away from this arranged marriage and this sort of link.
if they get the opportunity.
Absolutely.
I mean, Charlie, what it shows actually is there are different cultures, different practices growing within many of our cities.
Yeah, and if we still hold up this ideal of integration or assimilation as being desirable, then this cousin marriage is surely the best way to prevent that from happening. So if we make it illegal, then presumably, hopefully, we might start to see some integration. But I've got to tell you, someone very close to me is a midwife, right? And she tells me, and again, this is anecdotal evidence, but she tells me about situations where a cousin marriage has taken place and these people have procreated, and it's the extra forms, the extra costs, the extra time, and the suffering that the child goes through as a result of the birth defects caused by, reproducing with your cousin.
I think it is a realistic.
And again, this is anecdotal, but it's horrible. And this shouldn't be happening in Britain. This is the 21st century.
But making something illegal doesn't necessarily stop it. Female genital mutilation has been banned in this country for a very long time, and it still takes place.
But again, it
There's
depends
only
on
been
who.
one prosecution.
It's about who. Because if you had a government with the political will to actually enforce the law, which this one clearly doesn't, unless it's around things like hate speech, then I don't think it would be a problem.
Or the previous government for the last 14
Or the previous
years.
government, or the one before that, or the one before that.
There isn't a new problem. You can't put it all on this government.
You're quite right. Whatever laws we make,
Yeah.
people will break them, and I get that, but perhaps we ought to try. Going to have a quick minute here. New Zealand has decided to ban greyhound racing. In fact, there aren't many countries left in the world that still have greyhound racing. Well, it's a fair point that some of the animals do get badly injured, but you could extend the same argument to jump racing with horses. And are we heading, Joe, into a world where everything gets banned?
Well, it's always difficult, isn't it, with this thing with animals? I mean, I have been to greyhound racing and have enjoyed it, as I have been to horse racing, as I've been to football matches and all sorts of other things. And I think, the animal welfare lobby say that many of the animals, they are treated very badly and they fracture their legs and things, and they have a very short lifespan, and then they're looking to be rehomed and rescued. I think greyhound racing as a spectator sport and possibly as a betting sport has declined considerably over the last 50 years.
It has.
And it may be just that you just let it fade away. And actually, interestingly, the animal rights people have said they weren't seeking a ban. They were looking for it to just be gradually phased out.
Well, New Zealand government's gone further than that. Ever been dog racing, Charlie?
I haven't, I haven't. I think maybe it's a generational.
I tell you what, it's a great night out. It's a great night out. I've always loved it, but it is in decline anyway.
It is, and it
not a reason to ban it.
In my mind, to a category of, I guess we can call it a sport, right? Like hunting, like horse racing. It belongs to this category that I think a lot of our governing class in this country and also in New Zealand and other Western countries view as belonging to a time that is, that is done, is backwards, is silly, is fusty, and therefore sees fit to just ban these things. And I think that's very sad.
More choice. Now, I went to a big Christmas event last week, and there were crackers. I love Christmas crackers. I'm sure you do at home too.
Was this your spectator?
At that event, and also on sale in the House of Commons, are woke Christmas crackers. Yes, they are Christmas crackers without any cracker in them. Now, to attempt this on live television...
You've got to cross your arms, Nigel.
Right, there we go. If you can reach. You've got
to cross your arms as well.
No.
They actually work. They are non-woke crackers, but who wants to buy a Christmas cracker?
What's in them, though?
Well, I haven't actually got the presents yet, but let's have a little look.
Let's have a look.
We got green ribbons.
Gosh.
Oh, I've got a spinning top. That's very...
Wildflower seeds. I rather like that, actually.
Lovely.
I rather like that, actually. But there we are. Apparently, we're taking a snap out because we want to do something about climate change. Now, next Thursday, the 19th of December, 2024, I'm going to be back on the road with GB News. We're going to be at Maidstone in Kent. We're going to be doing a live event. It'll be live from 7 to 8 p.m, so right in the centre of the county of Kent. To get your tickets to come to the live show, gbnews.com, or scan the QR code on your screen. And I tell you what, I haven't been out on the road for GB News for some time. What I do know is we do these events, the tickets go like hotcakes, the evenings are fun, and they don't end at 8 o'clock, believe you me. In a moment, let's have a look at the damage Storm Dara did to renewable energy in this country.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
After the Hollywood ending that Wrexham Football Club have got, can Chorley FC benefit from a bit of the old celebrity magic dust?
I can't see why not. The guys have been down a few times now, and when they do come down, obviously they're bringing that with them. A little town like Chorley doesn't see much of the charts and big stars, so it's really nice to see them, and we always welcome them when they do come down.
And Mark, give us a flavour of the level of football. I understand you're in the National League North, right? That's 6 rungs down from the top flight? I mean, you're only just down the road from Manchester City, right? But I mean, give us a flavour of the two different worlds between your club and Man City.
Our players are all part-timers. So we've got kind of fitness coaches, we've got teachers, we've got all kinds of players who have full-time jobs alongside playing. Our average crowd is probably a tenth of what you get at Man City, probably even less than that. We get about 1,500 on a home game. The thing is, we know where we are and we understand where we are, and we are a real community club. Tonight, I'm ready now. I'm off to Marine, so off over to Merseyside. Playing the likes of Liverpool and Everton over on Merseyside would be kind of a dream come true. But we know where we are. We would just love to get to the Football League. So teams like Salford, Stockport County were in our division a couple of years ago, all flying now in the Football League. We just want to do the same. We sat down with the board last year and they told us the vision for the future, and that vision most definitely is that we want to be a Football League club. When we went to the Premier League, I know the boys have been saying that they 30 years we'll be in the Premier League and winning it. Well, let's hope we are, and let's hope I'm still around to see that.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
OK, sorry, we had a minor tech problem there. Now, Storm Dara came through the country. The biggest gusts of wind were up to 96 miles per hour. Have a look at these pictures of the UK's biggest solar farm. It's a 190-acre site, Port Wen, and it's on Anglesey. And those pictures are going to appear any minute now. Now, I'm afraid that the damage done was absolutely enormous. You can't see it yet on these pictures, but hopefully you will. There we are. Absolute wreckage. All those lovely panels made in China and huge damage done. And it does make you ask a question, because it isn't just solar farms. Equally, if wind turbines aren't shut down, the blades fall off. They catch fire. And I just wonder, and Malcolm Grimston is an old friend of this programme, Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Environmental Policy at Imperial. I just wonder, there are times, and of course, you can get problems with any form of energy, but it is this unpredictability of weather that's actually at the root of the problem with renewables.
It's an irony that the climate change that the renewables are designed to help fight against is also in some ways a significant challenge to them. We are seeing the technology beginning to evolve to deal with these. Modern wind turbines are designed to withstand winds of over 110 miles an hour constantly, and gusts of over 160 miles an hour for a 3-second period.
But they still have to lock them down, don't they, in terms of stopping the blades rotating?
That's right. There comes a certain point, and similarly with solar panels, even if they're made very robustly, there are weather conditions, snow being the obvious one, where they're not producing as much energy. So there's that side issue of how effective they are in various weather conditions, inevitably because they depend on taking energy from the weather systems of the planet. But in terms of their actual robustness against severe weather events, we are seeing improvements in the technology, as we do with everything. We can build ships that can withstand enormous waves. We can build space rockets, we can build...
But no reduction in cost.
that's the question that's going to come with all of this. What we've seen with renewables over recent years is that the unit cost has come down very dramatically, simply through economies of scale. Now, this is straightforward economics. And if there are new technologies which are expensive, but they're then being used at a huge scale, we'd expect the same sort of cost reductions there. The challenge with renewables is more a matter of managing the intermittency of the output.
Can we decarbonise the grid by 2030?
No.
Thank you. Joe, you're a bit of a fan of all this stuff. It does have its problems, the intermittency. And I use that, really, to bring up this problem, that when the wind doesn't blow, it produces nothing, etc.
Yes, of course. But, you know, the idea that an extreme weather event is a reason to not go for renewables is utterly ludicrous, as you very well know.
The wind didn't blow in November for about 2 weeks.
No, I know.
When wind was producing about 2% of what we needed.
So one of the things is finding ways, and I'm sure Malcolm knows much more about this than I do, it's about storage and how you can utilise.
But I've been hearing this for 25 years.
Yeah, and because nobody's done anything about it.
And it could be another 25 years.
Well, Nick Clegg famously said we shouldn't go down the route of nuclear power because it will take 20 years before we realise the benefit.
And it's now 20 years old. Yeah, no, I know.
We've got to do something, Nigel.
I wonder, Charlie, I sense there's quite a big change in attitudes towards nuclear power, especially the concept of these small modular reactors. Is that the way we should go?
Well, I think people still have this idea of Chernobyl in their head when they think about nuclear power, that it's this kind of rickety, dangerous, highly risky way of generating power, but it's not that anymore, right? We have advanced significantly since then. And I think that, there's no reason that, again, a 21st century nation like Britain isn't producing all of its energy using sources like nuclear. Because if you look at what now has to happen with this solar farm that's been destroyed in Anglesey, there needs to be an investigation. It's not going to be until 2025 and when repairs take place because of this labyrinthine system that we have that requires so much paperwork and so much talking before actually doing. I'm not saying that wouldn't be the case if we had nuclear. It's actually quite likely.
Well, there is some work going on.
There are people who are still without power. Several.
There's 10,000 houses without
power. And that wasn't because of the solar panels or the wind.
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. However, I mentioned what happened back in November. This incredibly calm period. Malcolm, we've got a couple of big nuclear projects on the go, but they're kind of old school monstrosities. Where is the world with the small modular reactors? Are they viable yet?
There's a lot of orders have come in. We haven't got one where you can go and kick the wheels of it yet.
Right.
And until we have, then there's going to be speculations because, rightly, enthusiasts get us going on the technology, but sometimes they over-egg the pudding.
There's been a lot of that going on.
And don't dismiss the big reactors, because when you've got a grid which needs huge amounts of power, then a central source generating 1,600 or 3,200 megawatts.
Constant.
Exactly, and it still fits in very nicely with that. But you've got the extra flexibility of the smaller reactors. They can be used in smaller bunches. They fit much more into smaller grids, developing country grids, for example. And the great advantage of them is that they're not building projects, they're manufacturing projects. You don't build them on site, you manufacture them in a factory, take them out to the site and do that. And that ought to bring very significant economies of scale. So the attractions there, and the Chinese, the States, the Canadians, huge numbers of people and our good selves are looking very seriously into this at the moment. But I'll feel more confident when we've actually got a few up and running.
And that is the problem. I'm very pro-nuclear. I think the concept of base load power makes an awful lot more sense than intermittent. But even I have to admit, nuclear energy, it's not cheap, is it?
Well, it depends how you finance it, first of all. If you finance it in the way the Chinese have done, for example, which is it's a state project at a nominal 5% rate of return, like we used to do with the Central Electricity Generating Board, then the fact that it's very expensive to build but then cheap to run doesn't become the same barrier as it does if you do it in a market where people are demanding 10%, 15% rates of returns. That works very much against heavily capital-intensive industries. And the Chinese, the Koreans, are very impressive with their project management now. And they're beginning to move into many of our markets here. The Canadians have always been very good with their can-do machine. There are other designs which we haven't quite got to that stage yet, and the EPR is one of those, the one that we're building at Hinkley Point. But there's no reason why it shouldn't at some point become a lot more efficient in terms of project management.
And it's a big thing, Joe, isn't it? One of the big parts of a Labour manifesto was, I'm going to give you cheaper energy.
Yeah.
Thus far, it's more expensive and looking to be much more expensive in the next 5 years.
But they need to get on with it, and
that'll cost even more.
But you know, we're going to always have this argument because there are people like you who will say, no, we can't do it, it's too expensive.
Hang on, I'm the forward-looking one. I want to go for SMRs.
But it's just, you know, oh, well, we can't rely on solar, we can't rely on wave, we can't rely on wind.
Clearly we can't. I mean, based on the events of the last few days.
But we need to, you know, we need to invest in the technology and the research and development that makes it, as Malcolm's just said, that it becomes cheaper. And I'll tell you the other thing. I've got solar panels fitted on my house, but I can't sell my excess energy back to the national grid because I can't have a smart meter fitted. Now, that is absolutely bonkers.
Yes,
well, you're one of the few because they're forcing smart meters on virtually everybody.
I've had so many engineers out, I mean, they've virtually moved in.
Well, if you live in the middle of nowhere, this is what happens, isn't it?
Right.
Final thought on this, Malcolm. Energy prices, next 5 years, given the strike prices, they're going up, aren't they?
It looks that way at the moment. So much of this does depend on the international situation. We have further turmoil in the Middle East, which is still, you know, that crescent that includes the Middle East and the former Soviet Union is still where we get most of the world's oil and gas from. So there are questions around that. And there's all still the question around how do we manage the intermittency of renewables, which if they produce too much electricity, it's going to be worse than producing
This debate's not going away. I tell you what, talking of that, let's go to the weather with Alex Deacon.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office. Here on GB News, the fog thickening up in places overnight and slow to clear across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland in particular tomorrow. Elsewhere, much of England and Wales is dry and cloudy. High pressure is keeping things that way. Not many big changes with the weather, but the wind's still coming in from the northeast, still feeding in a few showers across southeast England overnight. Elsewhere, as I said, most places dry, bit of drizzly rain heading into Shetland, but it's the fog thickening up across southwest Scotland and the west of Northern Ireland that could cause some problems. Freezing fog as temperatures fall well below freezing. We could see negative double digits through some sheltered glens across Scotland. That fog, particularly in and around Glasgow and across the west of Northern Ireland, may stick around for all of tomorrow. Certainly a dull, damp and drizzly start across Shetland, but actually some of the highest temperatures here to begin the day. We could be -9, -10 through some of the sheltered glens across Scotland. A cold start for Northern Ireland. That fog, particularly in the west, again, stubborn and slow to clear. And this cloud is pretty stubborn across England and Wales. Maybe some breaks in the cloud across northwest Wales, the far northwest of England. So chance of a bit of sunshine here and there, but mostly just staying cloudy, but largely dry. It's in the far south where we'll continue just to see a few showers and still a fairly brisk and chilly wind. Elsewhere, the wind's pretty light, generally a bit lighter than today. Temperatures still touch below average, 6 or 7 Celsius for most. Sunnier skies for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but temperatures here only 4 or 5 at best. And again, where that fog sticks, we're not going to get above freezing. Some of that fog thickening up again Wednesday night into Thursday morning. So again, that could be slow to clear on Thursday. Thicker cloud across these eastern and central parts of England on Thursday. Some drizzly rain is likely here, so quite dank. And again, not feeling very warm with temperatures, for the most part, single digits.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Imagine getting a call to tell you that you've won £50,000 in tax-free cash, our biggest cash